you, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, can you hear me and see the slides?
Everything looks good, Joe.
All right, well, welcome everyone. So I'm gonna spend some time talking about ChatGPT and telling you a little bit about what it is and what it can be useful for. As was mentioned, I work for Bucknell and I'm also the treasurer of ASCM. And a reminder, we do have a workshop coming up next month. This is an additional pay opportunity for members, but it's going to be held in 2 successive weeks for an hour and a half each. There's more details at the registration link, and that registration link has been posted in the chat. So feel free to look into that. So without further ado, I'd like to dive into ChatGPT. But before I get into the meat of the presentation, I do want to mention I am working with a colleague of mine named Daniel Street. In fact, his office is like right over here from where I'm sitting. And we just had a publication accepted in a journal in accounting. And the preprint of that publication is listed here with this link. And this should be published in the summer. But what we did is we looked at how this is applied to accounting, and there's actually a lot of overlap with how it could be applied to engineering management. So that'll be the focal point of what I talk about today. So first things first, I'd like to just kind of mention, just big picture, what is ChatGPT? So you'll hear the phrase large language model. And that's kind of the over collection of what ChatGPT fits into. So a large language model, it's trying to predict like text that should be in a conversation. So it's trying to predict words, if you will. This was developed by an organization called OpenAI. OpenAI started as a nonprofit, and then it eventually became for-profit, and now it is still in that for-profit realm, but it also has a huge financial backing now from Microsoft. So there's clearly some, situations going on there, and I'm not really going to get into that. ChatGPT launched for public use in November of 2022 after almost 2.5 years at least of development. So it had been in the works for multiple years, and they've been working on it since probably before the pandemic even started. In 2020. So it took a long time for them to launch ChatGPT. Once it launched in November 2022, it surpassed over 100 million users in less than 2 months. Now, the reason that's important is that means it's the fastest adopted technology ever, faster than the iPhone, etc. One of a couple of surveys here, and I'm not sure how many of these are actually like legitimate, but Glassdoor, through their Fishbowl survey, they said that 30% of professionals have used it, and then Monster.com said that at least 50% of workers had used it. I think that's a little skeptical. I have family that works in the healthcare field, and they have never used it. So, and since healthcare represents a large percentage of our workers in the United States, it just seems illogical that these numbers are true. But the point is, a lot of people are using it, and it's a widely adopted technology. And so it makes sense to at least kind of think about it and think about how you would use it and when you would use it. So a little bit more technical details. We are engineers after all. It was originally built on what is known as GPT-3. And you'll occasionally hear them say GPT 3.5. What the GPT stands for is Generative Pre-trained Transformer. What that is that's basically like this idea of using these algorithms and neural networks to build this large language model. Now, GPT-3 was trained in 2020 initially, but then with the 3.5 release, that meant that it was fine-tuned in 2021. So basically it was retrained and fine-tuned leading up to its release in 2022, November. GPT-3, it used neural networks, and it used cloud computing from Microsoft Azure. And it's estimated, although we can't find an official number, but it's estimated that it used at least $5 million worth of computation time just to train the model, okay? And most of this was done using reinforcement learning. a good analogy for reinforcement learning is if like you're trying to train your dog to sit and you give your dog a treat when it does sit, and then you don't give it a treat when it doesn't sit, like that would be reinforcement learning. You're giving it a treat so that it will continue doing that behavior. So that's kind of the thought process here. These models were trained so that if they got the right answer, they got like an upvote. If they didn't get the right answer, they didn't get the vote. And so it kind of learns that way. So ChatGPT learned from various conversations with users and user feedback, and that still goes on today. So there's some security issues that you've probably seen in the news regarding people's conversations with users and their feedback, and that's one of the issues. Now, in terms of what was it trained on, this is actually a table, and I've made a couple of just edits to it so it makes it a little bit more clear. But this is actually from the developers of GPT-3. So this is the reference paper on Archive, ARXIV. And so this paper is from 2020, and this is how GPT-3 was trained. And as you can see, they did crawl the internet. So the common crawl, that basically just means they crawled around the internet, going to websites that had a lot of visitors or a lot of upvotes. They also looked at some books. Now, books one, by the way, those are like classic books like Shakespeare and Dickens and stuff like that. Whereas books two, that's a corpus of like self-published books. And then finally, it also used Wikipedia. Now, a couple of things here. You'll notice that Wikipedia has the smallest number here. That's because Wikipedia is actually not very large. In terms of just how much storage space it takes up. So you can think of this column under quantity as like storage space or number of words. The weight in the training mix is also going to be attributed to that as well, based on just the number of words in the corpus. However, in the training of the neural network, how many times it actually like went back to it, how much weight did it actually give that particular data set, notice that Wikipedia gets the largest percentage. So Wikipedia was found to be the most truthful out of all of the different data sets, followed by the web text 2, followed by the books 1, which would be like the Shakespeare, etc. And then finally, like self-published books and then a common crawl of the internet were found to be like the least reliable in their epochs when it came to the training. So that's kind of how the technical aspect of how the GPT part was put together. So GPT-3 is the corpus, okay? So you can think of this as like this huge book, if you will. And then the chat part is how you interact with it, okay? So that's what's built on top of this. So one of the things that I'd like to do over the next few minutes is just talk about how can you use ChatGPT effectively, in your personal life, in your professional life. And so one thing that's very important is to develop effective prompts. So in my usage of ChatGPT and in my study of it, the better the prompt, the more likely the answer that you get will be effective. And so prompts that are specific, prompts that have good context, particularly like if you're explaining ambiguous terms, and if you have an example, that's good. So you'll hear people and you'll read articles about people that say, hey, I can use ChatGPT to help me write computer code. Well, that's truthful and untruthful at the same time. It's truthful if you give it an example. You could say something like, I have a database and it has these 3 fields, and this is an example of those 3 fields. So maybe you're like tracking, times at a 5K or something, a running race. And so you have like name, date, and then time, minutes, seconds. If you give it that information, that's very specific. But if you just say, ChatGPT, please write me some computer code that does blah, 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 well, that's not very specific. So you do need to give it an example. You need to provide some specificity with respect to what you actually want from it. Another thing to think about is you need to understand its interpretation. What I mean by this is LLMs are going to try to provide accurate responses, and it will actually appear relevant and appear accurate. But once you actually look at it a little bit deeper, you realize that it's actually incorrect. And what I mean by that is, if you actually are having a conversation with ChatGPT, you'll be able to read its response. Unfortunately, as you're reading it, you might actually see where it made a mistake, because it does show its work, and that's actually useful. But on the other hand, you can actually see where it started making predictions about words that should be in its response, and you'll see kind of where it gets a little leery. So for example, ChatGPT by default goes to the American date format, so month, day, year. And even if you tell it and you provide data that is in European format, and even if you tell it that's in European format, it doesn't always follow that, okay? So even if it's obvious that it's in European date format, I've still been able to break ChatGPT and have it still do things incorrectly and assume that it's American. So you as the user, you need to just understand that the LLM here, the large language model, it's going to perhaps misinterpret what you're trying to do, and it's going to interpret it in a different way. Clearly, it is a website, and they're still using ChatGPT chats to make the next version even better, and it is getting better. More on that in a few minutes. It does save your chats, so clearly don't put any private or sensitive or proprietary information in ChatGPT. There's actually been cases where there's been leaks, so like one user could see another user's chats. There's obviously some reinforcement learning going on. So for example, when you provide a message, you can actually like click a thumbs up saying, yes, this looks like the right answer. And so that allows ChatGPT to kind of be better the next time someone asks that question, or at least the next time they redo the model, they'll be able to make it better for that particular thing. So just keep in mind that it is saving your chats. And so clearly, it would be like putting something on the bulletin board at a school. You want to keep private, sensitive, and proprietary information off of it. The other thing, and this is perhaps to make sure you're awake here during the lunch hour, all of these 3 responses were from ChatGPT. And I'll pause here. First question is, are any of these right? And then the second one is, if so, which one? Because they all look the same on the left-hand side, but clearly they're not all the same on the right-hand side. So I'll give you the 3 more seconds. It's obviously not long enough to do this. So the third one here is correct, but I have actually seen ChatGPT all in a 24-hour period output each of these separately, and clearly only one of them is right. So there's definitely an issue with math, and this actually, it's frustrating because you're thinking a computer should be able to do math, and that's absolutely right. But remember, ChatGPT is a large language model. It's trying to predict text, predict language. It is not a calculator. And so that's an issue that it wasn't designed to do this. And it does happen to be right in the bottom case, but it does struggle with math. It's also not the best at factual information. There's actually a term now, they call it hallucinating. ChatGPT will hallucinate, basically false information or fake information. And part of that is because it was designed to have human-like conversation. And that means it's capable of creating answers. So you could actually go to ChatGPT and say, please write me a poem, and it will. Or you could say, my name is Joe. Can you give me, some type of alliterative form of music that has like JOE in it, and it'll do it. The problem here is ChatGPT, if you're asking it for a fact, it's going to respond, and you don't know whether it's being factual or whether it's being creative. There's like no barometer to tell you what ChatGPT decided to do in that particular moment. So what that means is you can't really trust ChatGPT for facts. You would need to verify the facts. The other thing that has occurred with ChatGPT, and people have shown this on LinkedIn and other areas, it actually does not provide references accurately. In some cases, it will provide an accurate reference, and in other cases, it'll just make something up. And it'll actually look truthful. So, for example, there's a gentleman that does some work in operations research, and he posted this on LinkedIn, and he asked ChatGPT for some references for a particular field. And ChatGPT had the names of authors that do publish in that field. They had the journals where those authors would publish, but then they made up the title of the article, the issue number, the volume number, and the page number. So ChatGPT is just making stuff up, but it looks legit. It looks close enough. It passes the, that initial test. But when you actually dive in deeper, you realize, oh, wait, that journal article does not actually exist. Those people did not actually write anything called that. So it makes up references, which is probably even scarier. LLMs and ChatGPT, they will know more about prominent topics. So this goes back to their corpus. If something's in their corpus frequently, they're going to know more about it. So I joked with my co-author, I was like, so they're clearly going to know more about Kim Kardashian than they are us, because she's famous and we're not. But for example, ChatGPT, they were able to correctly identify the namesake of Pittsburgh School of Engineering, whereas for the school where I work, they made up something for the namesake of the school where I work. So, and the person, Kenneth Freeman, for the school that I work, is not as famous as John Swanson. So that's probably why. So they will know more about prominent topics. So if you're asking something obscure or very niche, it might not know. So how do you use it? So one thing that you could do, particularly for engineering type of a problem, is if you are going to use it, if you make that choice, then break down complex tasks into smaller ones and allowing yourself to verify it each step of the way. So that will allow you to be skeptical and check its work. So similar to like what you would do if you had employed like an intern for the summer and you gave them some type of quantitative assignment to work on and then bring it back to you. Clearly, you wouldn't ask them to go out and do a 2-week project and then report back in 2 weeks. You might say, hey, I want you to work on this for a couple of hours, then come back and let me look at it. So that would be kind of the thought process with ChatGPT. Ask it to do a simple task, and then over a series of simple tasks, then it could build up to a more complete product. The other thing that you could do is you are allowed to ask follow-up questions. So they're called chats. And so, you'll ask like an initial question, and you can just continue that train of thought within the same chat. And so you could provide clarifications and reinforcement. So for example, if you wanted to ask ChatGPT about trust, it might originally misinterpret the word trust. It might think you're talking about like a will or a trust that you're going to set up for your family and your finances. Whereas you might then need to clarify, no, I need to talk about like trusting someone to, to do something or so forth and so on. So you'll have to kind of provide some reinforcement or clarification there. The other thing to keep in mind is ChatGPT was designed on data and a corpus from 2021. Okay, so anything after 2021, it is not knowledgeable. So it's not going to know anything from 2022. If laws have changed, if regulations have changed, it's not going to be helpful because it's not going to know about what has happened recently. The other thing that's strange, and we learn information as humans kind of over time, like you learn something when you're 5, then you come back later, you learn something when you're 6, when you're 7, so forth and so on. So we understand that things get superseded. But for ChatGPT, it learned everything all at once. And so it might find some obscure rule in its corpus that was actually superseded later, but it's now learned them at the same time. And so you will need to be specific when asking questions. You might have to say, please use such and such law from such and such year when assessing this situation. So just keep in mind that it doesn't always understand that it has outdated information in its corpus. So, and sometimes it uses the wrong version of something. The other thing I would recommend is try to use it to enhance what you're doing. I have found it most useful for general things such as, hey, can you give me a template for something, or can you draft a thank you note for the following? And then I would give it, some examples or some thoughts here. But I would not just full scale ask it to do something and then not go back and look at it. So there's always going to be some type of human in the loop whenever I use ChatGPT to just make sure that what it's suggesting is aligned with what I want it to do. So that would be another recommendation I would have for ChatGPT. So with that, I want to pause here because we said we would take some questions kind of in the middle of the time period. And so I have put ChatGPT to the test, but I want to see if there's any questions so far about just basic ChatGPT and what's going on with it. Stunned silence. All right, well, I'm going to move on, but if I see something in the chat, I might bounce it out. Okay, so I've actually put ChatGPT to the test in a couple of different areas, and one of which was engineering economy. Now, the reason I picked engineering economy is I've taught this course in the past, and it is quantitatively based. And so you've probably read, on various internet websites that, ChatGPT can pass the bar exam, ChatGPT can pass the SATs and do all this stuff. Well, number one, those are multiple choice. Number two, they're not as quantitative. And so I wanted to find something that was quantitative. And so I went with engineering economy. Now, I did have some multiple choice questions, but I also had the workout questions as well. So this was like a standard engineering economy type of a course. So I have, the time value money, the make or buy, equipment selection, all that stuff. The other thing to mention is, again, it's a large language model. So sometimes when you ask it a question and then you're reading its response, it doesn't actually answer the question. And so I did prompt it to just say, hey, you didn't answer the question. Can you elaborate more on this? So I did give it the benefit of the doubt. I didn't grade just its first response. I did actually try to get it to answer the question and provide something that looks reasonable, like it was trying to answer. So it did get that benefit. So let's see how it did. So for the first test, I actually had 8 true or false questions, and it only got 4 of them right. So basically, it's just as good as flipping a coin at that point. Ironically enough, it missed most of the ethics questions, which I guess is kind of scary when you think about it. For the 6 workout questions, so these are mathematical type questions, so like A given P, F given P, that sort of thing. Interest rate questions, break-even questions, it didn't get any of them correct. Now, I do offer partial credit, so obviously it did get some partial credit here. But this particular, in this particular case, ChatGPT would have failed my test, would have gotten a 46 on the test, and it would have been the worst student in the class. And for comparison, on a similar testing, students typically were averaging around 80. For the second test, this one, there were 2 multiple choice questions. It got 1 of them correct. There were 8 workout questions. It actually did get 2 of those correct. So, good job there. But the topics in this test included like discounted payback, rate of return questions, benefit cost ratio, stuff like that. And it was still pretty bad, grade of 48. And again, the average here on my second test, the students actually do a little bit better. So they were in, the mid 80s. So at this point, ChatGPT is the worst student in the class, and it's not even close. Test 3, I had 1 multiple choice question. It did not get it correct. I had 10 workout questions. 1 of them was correct. Many of them had the correct conclusion, but ChatGPT did not follow the instructions. So for test 3, I have it do incremental. I had the students do incremental analysis for making an alternative selection, and ChatGPT did not do incremental analysis. It just basically just ran the numbers and made a recommendation. So that's why I said it's not correct. It might have come to the correct final conclusion, but it did not come to the correct conclusion using the correct method. Therefore, it would have, received only partial credit, not full credit. So again, ChatGPT would have been the worst student in the class with a 47. So far, if you're keeping track, test 1, test 2, and test 3, ChatGPT is the worst student in the class. Now, on the final exam, which for me is cumulative, I do ask FE style questions and 5 choices, and they are workout type questions, but they are multiple choice. And so ChatGPT actually got 15 out of the 34 correct. I also have some true false questions, and it got 2 of those correct. So in this case, ChatGPT would have gotten a 56 because there was some partial credit available for the multiple choice questions, depending on how much work was done and how far along it was. So in this case, ChatGPT was not the worst student in the class, but overall, across all 3 tests plus the final exam, ChatGPT would have been the worst student in the class, and so it would have failed. And my thinking for why it did better on the final exam versus the 3 tests, it's not that it got smarter, it's that the final exam was multiple choice. And so, it got 3 more questions correct because of guessing. And so that's probably the difference between the 47 versus the 56. I'm just trying to check to make sure. I do see a question in the chat. I am going to address that after I'm done talking about a couple more things. So at this point, ChatGPT, it failed. But I need to talk about some stuff that's happened in the last few weeks. So in March of 2023, a new version of ChatGPT came out. So ChatGPT 4. Now this came out about 6 weeks ago, and you have to pay for a subscription to this. Even the paid subscription, you're limited to 25 questions per 3 hours, but you do have unlimited access to ChatGPT 3.5. So is it worth the money? Probably not, unless you're doing something like this. It does better on standardized tests, the ChatGPT 4, and they're even touting that. So they're publicizing that they're able to do well in the SATs, pass AP exams, pass the bar exam, all of which are multiple choice. Also, Bing Chat, so this is a Microsoft product using the Edge web browser. It is using GPT-4 as well. I do suspect that when it's at peak capacity, it might use 3.5 sometimes, but I can't verify that. But I do think that occasionally it's using 3.5. Bing Chat has the advantage, though, that not only does it have the GPT corpus, but it also has the internet search capabilities. So for example, if you go to ChatGPT and you say, who is Joe Wilk, it's not going to know who I am. It's just going to say, I don't know who that is. But if you ask Bing Chat, who is Joe Wilk, well, Microsoft owns LinkedIn, and provided you spell my name correctly, it's going to just find my LinkedIn profile and say, is this the Joe Wilk you're talking about? The benefit here is Bing Chat uses the GPT corpus, but it also has the internet searching capability. So it does occasionally provide references that are in the form of web links. So there's kind of like this kind of mixture of the corpus plus the information there. The other thing to mention about Bing Chat is when you use Bing Chat, you have the option of creative, balanced, or precise. So if you want it to be more creative, you can actually kind of say, I want you to be more creative. If you want it to be precise and give you factual information, you can select the precise version. Google also became available to select users again about a month ago in March. I was one of those users. It offers 3 drafts of answers. And so it's still trying to work out its algorithm because it's offering 3 drafts. And I do want to mention that in some cases, it only offers 1. So I was using it earlier this week, and in some instances, it was only offering me 1 answer instead of 3. So I think they're still doing some testing. What is interesting to me about Google is for ChatGPT, you know, they were working on it for probably 3 years. You know, it definitely 2 years because we know from the paper, but if they had worked on it prior to that, then that might be an additional year. So it took them like 3 years to roll out ChatGPT, whereas Google, you know, they frantically put something together in several months. So theirs is clearly still kind of working and trying to bring it up to speed. But with that, I did put all of those to the test back to the original questions. So when I said I was using ChatGPT before, I was using the original one, the legacy, which is 3.5. And what you'll see is that ChatGPT 4 is no longer failing. It's not doing great, but it would be a very marked improvement over GPT 3.5. So ChatGPT 4, which is the one that they're touting can pass the AP exams, pass the bar exam, ChatGPT 4 is doing very well. Bing Chat also does very well, which is built off of similar corpuses, ChatGPT 4. Now, Bard is still well behind, but again, it's only been in existence for a few months now, so they're still working out how to get it to go. But what can I say? I would say that ChatGPT going from 3.5 to 4 would be like my most improved student. But do keep in mind that this final exam was multiple choice. And so I think that has something to do with the percentages being as high as they are. I do want to just show you one more. I do have some questions because I used to teach courses in like systems engineering and stuff like that. So I did have some questions that were multiple choice, and I did align them back to the domains for ASCM. Now, I think, I know we have some senior leaders on the call. I think this is from the previous handbook. So it might not be the current handbook. My apologies there. But I listed kind of the shorthand of the domains on the left and domains 1 through 11. Again, I think this is for a slightly older edition of the handbook. But as you can see, for these kind of simple multiple choice questions that most of us probably would get all correct, ChatGPT 4, it knows this stuff. Really, the only area where it struggled was the ops and supply chain area. Whereas the legacy ChatGPT product, it would have passed barely. Bing Chat and Bard would have also passed. But clearly ChatGPT 4, for some basic multiple choice questions for each of these domains, it's very strong. The other thing to mention is ChatGPT 4 in this data set that I'm showing you here, it dominated ChatGPT 3.5 and Bing Chat. What I mean by that is if ChatGPT 3.5 or Bing got the question right, so did ChatGPT 4. So, so ChatGPT 4 was getting every question right, but if it missed one, then 3.5 and Bing also missed it. So, I saw a question in the chat, so let me address that here real quick. I'm going to repeat it just so everyone can see it. So the question is there a possibility for this technology to substitute human beings from writing journal articles? So that's actually an interesting question. One of the things that I've noticed about a lot of the publishers and a lot of the journals, they did come out with policies, I would say in the late winter, early spring, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. They basically said that using a large language model such as ChatGPT or LLM, such as Bard or Bing Chat, they can be part of your methods, but they're not an author. So you could use, and you essentially have to cite them and use them as part of your methodology. So I think that you could perhaps try to use it for maybe writer's block, but you're going to end up having to edit everything anyways. And so there's another comment in the chat here about ChatGPT not being up to speed on current events. That's because basically they set a, they had to basically just kind of draw a line and say, okay, we're going to use all of this information to train the model. And so they trained the model, probably late summer 2021, so August, September timeframe. And so everything up until that point was in the corpus of what it was trained on. But then, anything after September 2021, it doesn't know about it yet. So it doesn't know that Kansas City won the Super Bowl. In fact, it doesn't know, so it doesn't know Kansas City won the Super Bowl, and it doesn't even know the Rams won it the year before. Sorry, I go to sports. That's kind of like my default. I have one more slide here and then hopefully have some time for some additional questions. So just in summary, so going back to some of the kind of like how to use ChatGPT effectively and what's important for you, or at least what I think might be important. If you are going to use it, and it is very easy to use, you just go to the website, create an account, and you can use it for free. Develop effective prompts, and that takes some skill. You have to, ask it the right question in the right way. I feel like sometimes it's like talking to my kids. Understand the interpretation. So I'll use the word trust again. So, it might think the word trust is referencing like a will or family trust when you might be meaning, hey, can I trust this? That sort of thing. Don't provide private or sensitive or proprietary information. It still struggles with math, and it wasn't designed for math. That being said, though, they are working on plugins for ChatGPT, and Wolfram Alpha is like a math modeling, and they have a website, but it's also an app as well. Once ChatGPT and Wolfram Alpha get merged together with that plugin or add-in, then it will know how to do math. So I have a feeling number 4 here is going to go away pretty quickly. Be suspect of its stated facts. It knows more about prominent topics. So the more famous you are, it knows that. Obviously, if you're going to use it, break down your more complex task into something smaller. That way you can check its work and then, obviously give it some context and provide reinforcement or provide clarification and re-ask the question. And then obviously you can use it for enhancement. So for me, I might use it to help draft an email or draft a template of something, but I'm not using it for the final product. There is a question in the chat about can we get to a point where we can use one of these without worrying about giving away sensitive data? So I think the answer would be depends on what you're going to use it for. So for example, it's come out now that Bloomberg, the financial conglomerate, they are building their own large language model, and they're going to put in like all of their financial, documentation and stuff in this large language model, and they're going to train it on that. So I think if you worked for Bloomberg and you were using Bloomberg's large language model, then that would be fine. You could trust it because it's going to stay in-house. But anything that would be on like a website, and even in their terms of service, the ChatGPT and OpenAI, they even say like, we are using your chat to make our modeling better in the future. So they're saving it. They're going to keep reading it to learn from it. So at that point, that you shouldn't be putting stuff in there because they're obviously going to be using it to get better and get smarter. So I hope I addressed that question. So another question is there any chance to make the question or search more specific to ChatGPT, something similar to Google search where we can put a word in quotes? So I imagine they're going to probably get to something like that where you can say, please restrict, please. So you provide context. Let me back up a step. So it already does this to a certain extent. You could say something like, please address this as an engineering professional, period. And then rest of question, you ask it the engineering question you want to ask it. So you can already kind of frame it with your prompt, but you don't put it in quotes, you just frame the question. So for example, when I was asking it some of these final exam questions that I referenced here that were multiple choice, I would actually put in the first sentence, this is a multiple choice question. And then I would ask the question and give the options. So it knows its frame of reference is, oh, I'm looking for different options. I didn't actually have to do that. It probably still would have gotten the questions correct or incorrect, but it does help just to frame it. And then your follow-up question was, Bing Chat and ChatGPT-4, they're very similar. And yes, that is true. So Bing Chat that's run by Microsoft because Microsoft owns Bing. Microsoft is also a financial partner with OpenAI. I believe they've invested over $10 billion, billion with a B, into OpenAI. So Microsoft is basically tied to OpenAI and GPT. And so they're using the same corpus. So you're going to get similar answers and similar responses. The difference, though, is Bing Chat also has the option to go out to the internet and get a source, whereas ChatGPT, it is not searching the internet for that direct question. It's basically saved everything from its corpus into its, essentially like its brain, but it doesn't go out and get new information from the internet. Does that make sense? The other thing that's happening too with ChatGPT, it is now able to write code. Like it has a little code, for lack of a better word, app, if you will, and it can execute the code, but it's not connected to like an external source. So I'm not worried about that code actually being executed and crashing, the computer or something. But it does have that capability now, whereas early March, it did not have that capability. So even in the last 6 weeks, it's gone from not having that capability to having it. It also has the capability through some of its plugins to do some what I would consider like administrative things, but it hasn't they haven't added the capability for it to actually execute on those. So for example, there's apps now where you can use ChatGPT to like try to make travel arrangements. So like book a flight and that sort of thing. It can't purchase the tickets. It can basically say, here are your options. Okay. So kind of like kayak.com or something. So it's not at the point yet where it will actually make the purchase though. It's still requiring the human to say, oh, okay, like I'm now going to investigate these three options a little bit further. But people are now developing these plugins to where it can get you to that next point. Another way to think about this is it is able to get data or retrieve data from internet, but it cannot like rewrite or post. It can only retrieve or get. It'll be a big leap from a ethics and legal standpoint, in my opinion, when it makes that next step. Like once it's allowed to then actually automatically charge your credit card for those travel arrangements without you even checking them, I think that's a big leap in my opinion. And I'm sure it will happen. I just don't know when. But that is that to me is a big step.
Well, thank you, Joe. Are there any other questions that people may have? We have about 5 minutes left. Feel free to come mute if you have anything. This was really insightful, Joe. And I had wondered why some things I was finding were inaccurate. And it makes sense based on when they trained the model. So thanks for providing your specific testing and the results of that. I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, I'd like to close with a couple of thoughts here real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
For starters, this is a quote from Sam Altman. He is the CEO of OpenAI, and he said, ChatGPT is impressive, but not robust. So I like to think of it as like it's fun to play with, but then after a few minutes, you've already broken it or figured out why it's wrong on for something. So it is impressive that it has this wide array of knowledge, but it's not very deep. And then I also have a question in here. Ooh, yeah. So that there's a comment in the chat about using ChatGPT looking at another country's laws. That is absolutely correct. It's actually they've actually come out and said that ChatGPT it was overtrained on English and and articles from the United States, and so it's not very good at translating. It's decent, but it's not very good. And it is it's obviously biased towards more American articles than and thoughts and books and websites and stuff than say other cultures. So there's definitely going to be some lag there until it gets retrained. The other thing I want to mention, we do have the workshop next month, and so if this time is open for you, would love to have you be part of that. It's not going to be about ChatGPT, but it will be about data science, and there's there's a larger description of the workshop in this link, and so you can learn more about that. And I just want to thank you for giving me some of your time today, and hopefully you learned something. And if you do jump into ChatGPT, have fun. Just don't share any private information. All right, Anne-Marie, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Joe. It's been really great to have you all here and have all of your engagement. Thank you so much, Joe. I see a question here about giving an attendance certification. Agumba, I will check with Angie if that's available, and we can provide the PDH if available. for the, and Jean has the answer for you right here. Ajumba, please email ASCM headquarters and you can receive that, as well as any of you. I do hope to see you at the seminar, the data science seminar series. I am going to be attending it myself. I think it will be really pertinent. So please check out, I added the link again. Please check out that information and consider joining, as well as for our conference in Denver in October. Thank you so much for being here and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Thanks, Joe.